Okay, it looks like we're live.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, looks like we're live. Let me just pull up some chat. Welcome to the live show, everybody. It's Nick Wolf here with Tatusadu, Brandon. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on, Nick. Good morning. Super excited. Hope we get to have, I'm sure we will. We'll get to have some fun today.
Yeah, we will. And for everybody out there, I haven't done one of these in a while, so bear with me here a little bit. I just want to make sure that we're actually up and running on the YouTubes.
You too. Yeah, I don't know if Gabby can join us or not today.
I don't think he can.
Right.
Which, which is fine. But yeah, it looks like we have people watching. I think Gabby said he was going to hop into
Awesome.
the chat. So, okay. Well, now that we have a few people watching, hello, welcome. We're back with the Way We Grow podcast. And today I got Tatusadu here. He was on Gabby's show recently, and Gabby said, "Hey, you two should get together and do a show because everybody wants to know, Brandon, how you grow and a little bit more the origins of your growing background. You and I were kind of chopping it up a little bit before the show, and you were telling me how, you even working other jobs, you had sort of a good supply of your own. We were talking about being chefs back years ago, and so just to start it off, why don't you just tell that story again really quickly? We can omit names if need be, for
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
sake of
I don't want to get sued by that.
yeah, because that actually could happen. Who knows?
No, no
So
snitch. Yeah. No snitching. No
no
snitching of
snitching.
any kind.
But tell the brief truncated version of the story so that everybody can hear this.
It's just we were just chopping it up earlier. We both have some similar past experiences, backgrounds, whatever, as far as some of the I've been a butcher, baker, candlestick maker, everything in between. But the one thing I've done the whole time is cannabis, and so it's the one thing that people knew, that whether I was sitting in a tattoo chair or serving you dinner, or I was upper management at Bank one of the biggest retail banks in the country for decades, and so but I always had good herb, and I worked at a 5-star restaurant in Charleston for I don't know, about a year, and the restaurant jobs, and they have a way of separating from you. And I it was a steak restaurant, and we had a very famous chef come in, who I won't name, who's known for steaks, and that limits it. That like narrows it down.
That's pretty good.
And yeah, so somebody came back and said, "Hey, chef, guy wants to come back and talk to you." And I was like, "Wow, I just always assumed that guy, just the way he looks on TV and stuff, the way he acts, I was like, I just assumed he'd be kind of rude and arrogant, and I didn't expect to get a thank you." And yeah, cool, send him back. And so he comes back, and my boss didn't like, he didn't like the fact that I was a weed guy. Lots of bosses don't. My current boss loves it, but lots of bosses don't like that, and he especially didn't like it because his girlfriend smoked a lot of pot, and he was worried that we were hanging out or some weirdness like that. So he would always ask me to give him weed, and then he'd give it to his girlfriend or whatever. I didn't care, but so he sends this guy back, and I thought he was going to thank me for the meal. And he's like, "Hey, your boss told me you could take care of me." And I'm like, "Holy crap, I'm going to smoke this guy out? Okay, this is going to be weird. This will be a funny little story." And we're walking out to this guy's car in the private, elevator parking lot. And he's like, "So tell me this, because I'm like, yeah, whatever I got you, bro. Um, I got all kinds of flavors. I got all kinds, he's like, "Whoa, wait, you got different flavors?" I was like, "Oh yeah, of course. I'm a dispo, bro. I got you. Edibles, what do you need?" And he was like, I've just never had different flavors of Coke before. And I busted up laughing. I was like, Coke. And I think I'm the only deadhead on the planet who never did Coke, and so I was horrified. I don't do drugs, man. And so I immediately was like, no, I'm good. Sorry, bro. Just turned around and left him standing in the parking lot. But it was really funny.
Yeah.
And yeah, he wasn't real pleased. He had to go find somebody else. But I'm
Oh,
sure
that's so
somebody,
funny.
one of those servers, I'm sure took care of him.
That's still so funny though. Like just to
Yeah.
have somebody that you like, well enough to be like, holy crap, that this guy wants to talk to me, and then to be like, all stoked about being, hey man, he's gonna smoke my pot. Maybe I can smoke with him. Maybe we can like have that moment and get to know each other a little bit in a different way because you're gonna break down a little bit of that barrier and have that excitement just shattered when he's like, so you have different flavored Coke? Like that's a thing? That's
Yeah.
too much. That's too
I've had
funny.
some really funny celebrity moments. I've met a lot of celebrities, and they're very human.
For sure. Well,
I met some.
I like to go a little bit more
I served up the
chronologically.
Marley.
Say
Yeah,
that again?
yeah. I served up the Marleys at
Oh.
a festival in Asheville. We'll work into that later.
Yeah, so let's
It's
make
a
it a
pretty
little
fun
bit more
story.
chronological because, part of the way we grow is learning
Yeah,
what started your path to being a grower. So some people start by growing cannabis. That's the first introduction to horticulture, botany, agriculture, you name it. That's the first thing that they get their hands dirty with. But a lot of people like myself also were started off in grandma's garden or mom and dad's garden doing herbs and vegetables and tomatoes and having a bunch of blackberry bushes or just things like that that you can sort of, start your path with plants that way. So tell us a little bit about where your path or your journey with plants began.
sorry, let me sneak in a bong hit. I'm
No,
way
please
behind
feel
today.
free.
Um, but so yeah, I was really lucky um, in many respects to just be born where I was born. I was born in East Tennessee, in Johnson City, Tennessee. It's a little hillbilly town, Tri Cities, Bristol, Kingsport, and Johnson City. And what that did was get me into one of the most beautiful, lush places on the planet. Now I live out in Western Washington. I'm about a baseball throw away from Canada. I live on a little island, super lush, amazing. But growing up in the Smoky Mountains, as a kid, it just, because you get those, there's some guys I watch on YouTube that always talk about their Princess Mononoke account and when they're out hiking, like that Ghibli, like just whoa factor that they get in certain places.
Yeah.
As a little kid with the giant sword ferns and these, like the Appalachians, some of the oldest mountains on the planet. And it was just really overwhelming to me and just amazing and really set my creativity off. I kept waiting for a brontosaurus to walk out of the woods or something
Yeah.
like that. And so I fell in love with plants and just nature as a kid. My parents liked to camp and do a lot of outdoor stuff when I was a kid. And so we, came back naturally. We were scouts and all that kind of stuff. But then we also, my parents were hippies, they were heads, and so they were a part of that back to the land, in the late 60s, early 70s movement. And so we always had huge gardens that my twin brother and I were gainfully unemployed in, but there all the time, weeding, doing whatever.
Yeah.
um, my mom is a retired botanist. Her little sister Betsy, ran Evergreen, which is the Carter family fold, Johnny Cash's wife's. That it's their nursery over in
Oh.
Virginia. And so I grew up with plant people. I grew up in and around gardens, and I always joke my first pet was a fern that you know, I'll tell on myself. I brought it home from the Smoky Mountains. You shouldn't do that. You should not take things from national or state parks. But I was probably in fourth grade, and nobody really gave me too much hell about it. But so I liked plants, And because of, my mom had, all the basics, the golden pothos and the snake plants and the Boston ferns and the things that you would expect, somebody maybe to have in their house. My grandmother was more into the begonias and that kind of stuff. That's where I get my begonia addiction. I have a huge begonia collection. And the reason I got into begonias is because I'm a pothead and I'm always chasing terpenes. And I've never met any plant people who know terpenes like the begonia folks do. Like we're chasing,
Really?
like, do you taste it? Do you taste that peanut butter? Do you taste it? Well, the begonia folks are, they're going to put a plant in your face and it's going to smell like a jar of Jiffy. Like it's just like amazing. So like terpenes is the begonia world that's really strong. But so I've been
Are
interested in
begonias
plants my
very
whole life.
like odorous?
Some can be, most are
Huh.
not. Most are not. And they have and again, it's like little tiny, simple flowers, just
Yeah.
like cannabis. I'm not attracted. Like I appreciate a big showy plant. Those are all biological strategies for pollination and that kind of stuff. Some are, color, some are smell, some are, there's all different ways that plants get, you know, insects or whatever. Cannabis tends to be wind pollinated, so it doesn't need to be a big showy plant, with its flowers. I like its flowers just how they are. But yeah, so I've liked plants my whole life. But my dad, I can tell on him because he's passed away and he can do the time now. And so my dad did a lot of cannabis growing,
Okay.
and he and my uncle, who also passed away, that his brother, they grew a lot of cannabis. They grew a lot of weed, and they used to drive around in our Volkswagen bus with big paper um, grocery bags full of weed and show up at a party. And they used to sell lids, and we had, and the triple beam would come out. And so that's the environment I grew up in. So I
Okay.
grew up in a household where people were taking acid and stacking 40 TVs against the wall to watch the Yellow Submarine, or breaking out all the art supplies on a giant table and everybody getting weird and doing art. And so I definitely don't want to paint it as this perfect hippie environment, because it wasn't. There was a lot of lame stuff that went on too, but there was some really cool stuff. My parents had these friends who, jumping ahead just a little bit, my parents had these friends. This was probably like, I don't know, fourth grade. Um, but they had some friends who had come over from Israel to New York, set up a fake import business, and they were sending basically ceramic trinkets over, but packed full of really good hash.
Oh,
And so
damn.
they did that for like a year and made a lot of money. And
Yeah.
so they bought a mountain in East Tennessee and set up this, incredible little hippie paradise with, you know, creeks and streams
Wait,
and
this was your
mountains
parents?
and ponies. No, some friends of theirs.
Oh, some friends of theirs. Okay,
Some friends
sorry.
of theirs. Yeah, yeah. But so a place that we got to go out to. And then my dad and mom, that we stayed in Tennessee. All their friends from high school were still in Tennessee, a lot of them. And so they were like, there was a spot out on one of the TVA lakes where there was a bunch of folks in a bunch of different houses, kind of a communal setting, um, where we'd get to go out and run free and play in the lakes and stuff with a bunch of other hippie kids. And that kind of stuff was really fun. I definitely got smoked out as a kid. I don't recommend smoking out your 4-year-olds, but I could still do math. So it's but I don't recommend it. But
Sure.
the first time I consciously got high, I was 4 years old. And I had my dad. They'd smoke a joint and put the car on recirculate, so we'd fall asleep for long car rides. So I know I'd been high before that, but it wasn't. It was just I fell asleep. This was the first time I ever got high. I was sitting in the Smoky Mountains, one of the most beautiful places on the planet, and my dad's sitting here, and his friend Bill was sitting here, and they were passing a joint back and forth, and we're watching this herd of deer in this beautiful valley in these mountains. And I'm just a kid, and I'm just sitting there, and they started getting really high. So after a while, they start handing me the joint to hand to the other person, and I was just like, well, I see what's going, monkey see, monkey do. I took a
Yeah.
big hit, and I don't remember seeing, and they both were like, "Oh God," like he's gonna be ripped, and I was, and I remember everything getting very soft and and I very distinctly remember this kind of lavender. Everything turned to like a monotone kind of purples. Like it was
Sure.
just, I was like, wow, everything just got beautiful,
That's
and I just
crazy.
remember love.
Dude, that's crazy that you remember that. Like, so
It
like
was
the
very impactful.
I mean, I for sure, and I know that cannabis does cause a little bit of short-term memory problems, right? Like I know the
Yep.
days that I get super blitzed in the morning, I forget shit. That it happens. I end up getting like space locked in on some sort of show or watching the birds or something, and so I'll just forget time. But for you to be able to like have such an impactful moment at such a young age. And how old are you now?
I'll be 58 here very shortly,
For
so
sure.
I'm almost 60.
That's a crazy memory to have of almost 54 years ago. That's crazy. I don't,
Did you ever see the show Taxi?
the
Taxi was a
show
comedy in
Taxi?
the yeah, it was a show in the 70s. It was a comedy, and there was a guy in it, Jim Ignatowski, and he was this tweaker guy. And he was always tweaking, and he did a lot of drugs. And they went back to his origin story, and it was him eating a brownie, or like he was at his girlfriend's house. He was super straight. He had his leather sweater on. He was, and he was like, he didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't, and he took a bite of one of those brownies, and it was like he turned, like he did his first little, and then you were like, oh, it got him, and that got me, and then like, so my parents grew, and there was always lots of weed around. We were very poor, as a lot of heads were, and I knew definitely not, like, no matter what, if the house catches on fire, you don't call 911. You get out of the house, but you don't ever call the cops, no matter what. So there was a lot of weed around, and it was something that I knew, like, I was never ashamed of, but I knew it was illegal. And I knew it'd get you in a lot of trouble. And so we kept it really quiet. And then I was a soccer player, and that was kind of like I went to Indiana, which is, debatably the best soccer school in the United States still. And I was real proud of that. But I also knew that, like, sports was going to be, and academics was how I was going to get into school. I wasn't going to be able to pay for it. And so I was pretty straight edge, like, all through high school. I got drunk a couple of times. I smoked pot a couple of times, mostly because there was a college girl that I really liked who liked weed. And and like my first attempt at growing weed was for this girl. I was 16, and I tried to do a grow, and my mom found it, and because it was in her house, and of course, yeah, I don't know. I wasn't really thinking about how I was going to pull that off. I just was going to get it started. And my dad, the one thing that I really, really, really regret about when my dad passed away is my dad had this wooden sewing box, and you flip open the top, and then it would accordion open, and then there was like space for like knitting or cloth or down below, but then it's all this, almost like a tackle box, all these things for needles and threads and all this stuff. But my dad didn't sew, and so it was usually full of drugs, and it always smelled incredible because it smelled like all these different kinds of weed, and he had seeds, and
Okay.
old folks will remember that,
Yeah.
we used to keep seeds in film canisters because nothing goes with weed like super toxic film chemistry. But that's how we would store it, and all those got lost when he passed.
Mm,
And I know a lot of them probably weren't viable, but there was some fire from the 60s and 70s in there
sure.
that I would love to have. But yeah, so that was me getting high as a kid.
Well,
All
I'm
my
gonna
aunts and
pause.
uncles smoked.
I'm gonna pause you really quick because I want to have you elaborate a little bit on that first grow, just to stick in the theme of the show here. So you decided, hey, I'm gonna grow for this girl because, well, you
I
know,
like
16-year-old boys do stupid 16-year-old boy stuff. So tell us a little
yeah.
bit about that first grow. Like, how did you have it set up? What were you using? Lighting, substrate, just like what was your 16-year-old
Yeah.
mind doing there?
Well, so I was pretty lucky. I was kind of ahead of the curve because of my mom.
Mm-hmm.
I had taken a fluorescent light that wasn't being used in the garage, you know, and it wasn't a grow light, it wasn't a grow bulb or any of that kind of stuff. What are the old HOs, fluorescents and like aquarium lights we would get and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't hip to that yet, but I knew it needed light, and I knew that my mom had supplemental lighting over some of her indoor plants, and so I was like, okay, so I've got to get some light, and so I had like just two bulbs, probably like a 4-foot fixture, and then substrate. I'm pretty sure I probably stole. Liberated would be a better word. I liberated some of my mom's probably Miracle Grow,
Yeah.
just what I wouldn't put a tomato in these days, Um, but
I
that
this
was
you
that
know
was a good
Miracle
start.
Grow of the 70s was probably better than Miracle Grow today.
Yeah, yeah, it probably was. It probably was. But still not where, but it put me ahead of the curve because I had fertility that I didn't really have to worry about.
Sure.
That wasn't, I wasn't really hip to fertility, because like my dad, like we did a bunch of dumb stuff in Tennessee, with heavy clay. The extension agent would say, put out some dolomite. And so we'd be like, sure. And we'd put out a bunch of dolomite to raise our pH. But what we did is just tighten that clay up worse and worse and worse every round. But
Yeah.
so my dad did fertility. I didn't, I knew what ag lime was as a little kid. I knew what these things were, but I didn't know how they worked or chemistry or any of that kind of stuff, obviously. Um,
Did you know
and by
about
the
the
time
lighting
I did
schedule?
this, I knew, yeah, I did know that I needed. So, okay, so I should have brought him in here, but I have a stack of my dad's grow books. And so my
Oh,
dad had Grow Your Own Stone. He had all these early, he was head of the Impeach Nixon committee at University of Tennessee. Like he was a radical. He was more like
okay.
Weather Report than, Joan Baez hippie, he was more radical. And
Sure.
yeah, so he had all the early, publications, um, of like, hand, homemade, all the Ken Kesey stuff, all the, you know, man, I should have brought him in here, but yeah, he's got all these cool books. And so I knew a little bit about, cannabis was different. It was a photoperiod plant. Like that was where I learned about a photoperiod plant. But these were things that I was cognizant of. I didn't understand them. Like I'm going through the process right now of teaching my identical twin brother, Jason, coolest dude I know. Um, I'm teaching him how to grow. And like I always joke with him, like he can't grow mold in a bathtub. Like he's not a grower. He doesn't like it. He didn't fall in love with it. He's a musician, an amazing musician. I remember being at a festival one time, with some friends, Spirit of Swanee down in Florida, which is a really cool venue. Like if you've never taken a shower in the bus down there, you need to go. And super cool venue. But like we heard this guy, we're walking around, we heard this guy shredding a banjo, just like unreal, Flat and Scruggs level. Just in my head, he would be very humble and say, "Oh hell no," but I heard this guy shredding, and we're like, "Let's go check that out. That's amazing!" And it was my brother, so he's an amazing musician and a
Cool.
wonderful human being, but he can't grow, and so it's really interesting because I take all these things for granted now. And so, like, I don't want to pretend like I understood those things back then. I might have been aware of them, but I didn't understand it at all.
For
You
sure.
know, but I knew I needed some soil. And then like the next grow I didn't even use soil. I used dirt. I used some dirt that I went across the street and dug out of the park, you know,
Okay.
and could not understand why my plants just looked like shit, you know, like
What was the gap
starting
of time?
seedlings off.
What was the gap of time between the that first grow and the second grow since your mom caught you the first time?
Yeah, so we threw some. I won't incriminate anybody. Me and a friend threw some seeds outdoors in the spring. Like I was savvy enough as a kid that grew up on, you know, in working on farms and stuff. Like there's a time that, you know, temperature and light and that kind of stuff. Like you don't just try to start seeds in the fall, and especially
Right.
not in South Bend, Indiana, where you get, you know, it snows from Halloween to Easter. So, you know, spring, we had a fence where we line up behind my house, and there was like a gap behind the garage that the neighbors couldn't see into, and so we tried to start some there, and like they started, and then they fell off after a while, you know. um, we probably just overwatered them to death, honestly. um, super hard segue. I just got to tell this story really quickly while I'm thinking
Yeah.
about this, about overwatering. So I've got a buddy who is in Charleston, South Carolina, and he's a world renowned uh, landscape artist and just amazing paintings. And I'm lucky enough to have one in my living room. And I love this guy. I've known him for years, and he's just really funny. And he's definitely like he's not a deadhead, but he's kind of embraced that better than anybody I know. That just zest for life and just wringing every minute of fun out of life. And he's just a fun guy to hang out with. But so he's got a friend who used to be the road manager for the Allman Brothers, and they used to live a couple blocks away from each other out on an island at the beach in South Carolina. And they'd get together and drink and smoke, and they're sitting out on this guy's porch one night, and he's like, "Oh, I got to show you, man. I got a couple pot plants behind my shed here." And they go back and they look at him, and my buddy, being the prankster that he is, just immediately starts, all the plants looked horrible. He's like, they were just super lousy. I don't know why he was so proud. He's like, but he started peeing on one, like just immediately was like, he's like, we've been sitting on the porch drinking. He's like, I had a plan. So he was growing in a closet at his house with fluorescents and had a really nice, healthy plant. So his friend gets really mad at him. What are you doing? Beat it. Sends him home. So he waits till like 4 o'clock in the morning, goes back over and replaces this sickly plant that he peed on with this amazing plant, comparatively, relatively, it was green and healthy and a lot more biomass, and replaces it, and then goes back home and goes to bed. So the next morning, dude's at his door like, Mickey, you got to come pee on my plants. Yeah.
That's great.
And he didn't tell him for months. He's like,
Oh.
he'd come over and like, yeah. So that was a really fun weed prank. But yeah, so probably overwatered those to death. And then I went to Indiana University, 18, to play soccer. And I was pretty sheltered, because my parents, my dad did a lot of nefarious activities. We weren't allowed to have kids over to our house a lot. We didn't go over to other people's houses a lot. My dad kept us kind of solo, and just pretty lame in retrospect. But I got real social when I got to college, and I bumped into some guys I went to high school with that, we were friendly enough in high school, but not like super close. We weren't like buddies or anything. I was definitely kind of like I don't know. I wasn't like in that crowd. What's up, Gabby?
What is
And
up, gentlemen?
started hanging out with this guy, Chris Butler, Ed, that I went to high school with. And he was awesome, man. He was super fun. He was into the Dead. He always had good weed. and he and Mike Metzges, I was real into the Stones, but these guys were real into Zeppelin and the Dead, and Chaz Nelson, who also went to high school with us. I think he went to Notre Dame. He didn't go to IU, and he's like senior year of high school. He's who turned me onto the Dead, and he was just a super mellow, quiet, but real into weed, real into the Grateful Dead. And rest in peace. He was a really cool dude and really kind to me in situations where he didn't have to be or whatever. I was definitely like not in the circle, and he would always make an effort to include me, which I always really am grateful for. And he's the person that introduced me to Roadkill Skunk in, I guess, 86, somewhere around there. And his brother was older than us and was a deadhead, and he had a plug for it. And so Chaz always had fire ass. Like, we had access to Kind Bud before I even knew it was what Kind Bud was.
Nice.
He was the first person that I ever met where you could, put your finger down on a bud and it would just stick to your finger. It didn't even look like weed because all we smoked was brick weed.
Sure.
We didn't even know weed looked like that. And so those guys really they got me on the bus, in terms of like the Freedom Train, being a deadhead, really embracing the weed thing. And there was, again, another silly thing I was doing because of a girl. There was this girl I really liked, and I was on the soccer team at IU. I thought it was hot shit, man, and
we lost
I asked this
audio
girl,
for you
like,
there.
oh, can you hear me?
I
Can
can't
you hear
hear
me?
anything. Can you
I
say
hear
something?
I hear him just fine. I hear
Okay, weird.
Brandon just fine.
Okay, should I keep talking?
Can you hear me, Nick? Nick, can you
I
hear
can
me?
hear
For
you,
some
Gabby.
reason, I can't not hear anything. I'm gonna
Log off. So while Nick tries to figure
I'm
this
gonna try
out,
and disconnect these and turn them back on.
Okay.
don't do that.
Yeah. So
Don't do that. Wait. Don't do that. That causes problems.
It's too late now.
Can you hear us now? Can you hear us?
I hear you.
Okay. I can hear you. I can hear everybody.
Can you hear us now?
Now I can't hear Nick.
Oh, can you not hear me now?
I hear
Now
you.
you're back.
Okay.
Everything's
Looks like
good.
This is
Sorry, everybody.
the Three Stooges.
Yeah, no, that's all right.
Hey, hey, since we got interrupted,
so
can I say something real fast?
Please.
I just joined this podcast because I wanted to take a minute to express my love and admiration for these two guys. I was supposed to try to join you guys today, but life is making it difficult. I got a lot of work I got to do today. But
It's all good.
I just wanted everyone to know, like, you've got Brandon Tatusadu, who is, an organic specialist. What is the term that you are? He's an agronomist for Kiss Organics. The knowledge that he has is exceptional. And then we've got Nick, who, you know, his knowledge is also, far exceeds what most people have. And I just think we're so lucky to have these two guys doing this show together today. I will be listening. I will be commenting in the chat. And I hope you guys all enjoy. Please, everybody, share this. Let's get some more people watching the live. And yeah, love to you both. I'm really excited that we got Nick doing a Way We Grow again.
Well,
Alrighty, guys.
it's just life's busy.
Gone.
I know I can relate to life being busy.
Yeah.
I can't be there today. But I hope everybody enjoys the show. You guys have a great day.
Thanks, Gabby.
I'm listening.
Much love,
I'm going to be
bro.
listening.
All right.
Nice.
All right. Had the brief pop in from our fearless leader, Gabby. He's a good guy. Isn't he a
Awesome.
nice guy, everybody? Big ups for Gabby
Yeah.
in the chat. Throw him a "We love you, Gabby," or "Gabby, you're not as bad as everyone says you are." Something like that. Just give him some love. Um, I have to rag on him a little bit, but okay, let's see. Before we were so kindly interrupted.
So I was about to tell an embarrassing story. I was pretty straight in high school. I was thinking that sports and academics were going to be the only way that I would get into school. I moved 23 times by the time I was 18 years old. Again, my dad was into some
Wow.
nefarious acts, so we moved a lot. And I have a
That's
twin
gnarly.
brother, so I didn't make a lot of close friends because I wasn't, I'd go to two schools in a year, and so I wasn't gonna know you 6 months from now. And so even in high school, I was, kind of stuck to myself a lot.
Yeah.
But when I got into college, these guys were really kind to me and gave me an opportunity to have friends and be social, and it was really wonderful. And I asked this girl to this soccer party, and she was like, "No, I got a homework tonight, thanks," or whatever. And I was like, "Oh, that's a bummer." And but I was like, "Okay, cool, whatever." And my buddy, Chris, Butler, he was like, we're going, and I was like, "Oh yeah, okay, let's go." He's like, "Yeah, dude, just because she's not going, we're not gonna pass this party up, idiot," So and I was his, he could be my plus one. He needed somebody to get him in there. And so we went. And not being a particularly experienced drinker, I got drunk, like and pretty silly, to the point where he was like, "All right, bro, we got to get out of here." And so we're walking home, and I just remember we had like the best time that night. And when we got back, we smoked. And the next day, I bought a sack, bought a bong, and I've pretty much been high every day since then. And there's been a couple of I've been sick a couple of times. There's been things that have happened, but for the most part, I've been high since then. Yeah.
Well, I can relate. There was like a point where like I wasn't smoking, and then there was everything that followed.
Weed was really important for my mental health. It's been really important for my physical. Like I've played a lot of sports. I've broken a lot of bones. I've broken my back. I've got a lot of injuries and stuff. And it's like my oil can. I smoke a lot of weed. I smoke from early in the morning till late at night. And there's certain things like I like to do. Like Gabby mentioned, I'm the agronomist for KISS Organics. I sit in a very specialized niche. I sit in a little corner in cannabis where I do organic substrate analysis and recommendations for folks. And I do a lot of things, we all do in cannabis, IPM, whatever, like how many of us know how to like do plumbing, electricity, we can frame out a house. It's not because we set out to do any of that stuff. It's because of prohibition. We had to know how to do that stuff because you couldn't call an electrician to come wire your grow for you. You had to figure it out.
And now it's due to increased overhead and decreased revenue stream.
Right.
So you just have to do it all.
Back to where people they got to be self-sufficient again. Yeah, it's crazy how it's changed, but
So let's see. So you told us about your first couple grows there and some of your early childhood sort of inspirations, if you will, that led you towards the path of being an agronomist today. Let's talk about some of your first successful grows where you really found that you were kind of like hitting your stride, and were more understanding the plant and its needs, and what were some of those breakthroughs that you made along the way where you like really wanted to continue growing this plant? Because for anybody that's grown out there a few times at home, they know that there's ups and downs. You know, you win some, you lose some, especially early on. But when you find your stride and you kind of have successful grow after successful grow, it becomes something that is a little bit more feasible in the long term. So tell us a little bit about that middle stage of the growing experience for you.
Yeah, so most of the early ones, like you said, were not successful, and completely not successful. You know, I was just making, and I think that's part of being a good grower. That's part of the path of being a well-rounded grower is plants and people. You're going to have L's. You're going to take losses. You're going to have, and so you start this checklist very early. Okay, overwatering, planting in the wrong place, trying to pull off a grow in your mom's house. Like there's certain things that are just not going to set you up for success early on. And so you start making this list of things that you don't do. And that's just as important as the things that you should do. Um, and so like the first plants that I grew, you know, and so like I had seen my dad grow plants outdoors successfully, you know, and lots of it. And my plants just never looked like that. They never, you know. And so I lived in, you know, I went to Ohio State. There's a ton of people there. I mean, just an absolute ton. I transferred there from, long story, but I got kicked out of Indiana University. And yeah, it was worth it. I'll just leave it at that. But
Fair.
I, I didn't get kicked out. It was suggested that I reevaluate my priorities, and then if I would like to attend the university, they would like be happy to talk to me. And so I had too much fun, and they frowned on the amount of fun I was having. And
Fair.
but I'm sure a lot of people did. Fair, whatever. Yeah, I was on the bus by then. I didn't care. And so I transferred to Ohio State, and I bumped into this girl that ran track at IU. We both played sports at Indiana, and we both transferred after our freshman year. She didn't get into trouble, and but we started dating. You know, one thing we bumped into each other was familiarity. One thing led to another. We ended up dating, and I took over this house that she had been living in, and lived with some friends of mine, and there was a open attic, and it was just a closet, and her dad, it was stairs up to the third floor is what it was, and her dad had closed that in just because it's cold in the wintertime there or whatever. And so for all intents and purposes it just looked like a closet, but you could push this board up and you could walk up the stairs to the third floor. And so I had tried some plants down the hill. I lived on Kelso. Was it 12 East Kelso? It's right at the bottom of the road where it hits High Street. And right across the street from that, there was a ravine that got good sun. And I had pulled off a plant in those woods.
Okay.
And it was like a retirement. It was like a retirement village or something. So it's a bunch of, you know, folks in their 80s who are not going to go climbing down into these, you know, super steep ravines, you know. And I had pulled off, you know, and it only got like, you know, this big, and I had a cola about this big, but I had grown weed, and it got us high. Like, holy crap, it worked.
Cool.
And that's the thing that hits me every round, every single round, still to this day. Every time I take that first hit, I'm fully expecting it to be like, it didn't work, you know. And it works every time. It works every time. But so that was successful, and so that I set up some pots in that attic and fluorescent tube lights. By then I had, you know, figured out, had read some books, and was like, okay, I need to get some better lights. And then there was a friend of mine who he would take, he had a refrigerator box in his spare bedroom, and he had lined it with foil, and he had put lights up and down. Like he had taken a fluorescent hood, like with two lights, and turned it this way, and he put those in the corners, all four corners. And I don't know if you remember those, what were they called? You'd see him like in High Times magazines and stuff, but it was like this all-in-one like to grow one plant, and it was like this
I know what
kind
you're
of
talking
stealth
about.
box thing. But it essentially was one of those in a refrigerator box, and he
Okay.
was growing pretty good weed, you know. And so like we were getting seeds, you know. I was getting seeds out of my dad's stash, you know, because my dad had better weed than any of my friends, you know. My dad
Sure.
always had better weed than us for a long time, until I'd say until like 91, my dad had better weed than us. And then after, you know, after I started, my first dead shows were in 88. And after I got a little comfortable on the dead lot, I was pretty nervous on the dead lot. I was getting my my weed, everything at home from friends. I wasn't asking for stuff on the lot the first couple of years. I was pretty nervous. But
Sure.
after a couple of years, you know, I was pretty savvy to shake down, and had some friends, you know, had some plugs on the lot, and we had better weed than him at that point. You know, I remember bumping into my dad at an Allman Brothers Little Feat show with a bunch of my friends. This would have been like maybe 89. And my dad came up, and he had a pack of gum in his shirt pocket, and he pulled it out, and he had this, you know, little pinners, all these little toothpick joints. And all my friends were like, "Oh, put that away, you know, put those toothpicks away," and like pulled out a bunch of cones, and we got him blasted. But yeah, I would bump into my dad occasionally at concerts. I would bump into him. I bumped into him at the Grateful Dead. I bumped into him at the Stones. I went to the Who with him. Bumped into him at Almonds. So yeah, I would occasionally cross paths with him at shows, which was weird, funny.
That is.
But yeah, so I had success with that, and then I tried to do a grow. I was growing in a condo, um, like an upstairs bedroom, and I had like put this opaque. It was like slightly translucent, but you couldn't see through it. Covering on the windows. I was getting natural light, and then I had again fluorescence. I didn't get uh, I didn't get my first real grow light until 92, maybe
Okay.
somewhere in there, and it was 93. I don't know. It was later, because we just used fluorescence up until then. So like high intensity lights were like something we dreamed about. We knew that they were out there, but not being on the West Coast, like being even, you know, Ohio's a lot. Certain areas of Ohio are a lot hipper than people realize. Like there's some super hippie, Yellow Springs, you know, Athens, Lake Hope.
The consequences in
Just the
Ohio have
size of the
always been
universe.
crazy.
Yeah, it was scary. But so like there was no place you could go buy a light, and
Yeah.
then there was all of a sudden. And okay, so I've got a funny story for you. I got a good story. So
Okay.
my first grow light, I had this friend who I loved dearly, Scott Pansing, and Scott turned me on to Fela Kuda. Fela ran some cootie, and so like I'll always be grateful to that guy just for turning me on to Fela. But he was a lot of fun, and we were really good friends. And he helped me through like a really down point in my life. You know, he would show up and pick me up from work, and just make sure that I was, you know, keeping my head up and stuff. So he was a really good dude. And he and I were at a party, and we'd been getting some really good herb, like for a while. And like again, we were growing bag seed. That's what we had. Nobody was trading cuts. Like, you know, even the people that grew, like I've heard Natso say that he would make a point of like buying a bag off of somebody so that people didn't know he was growing. You know, it was that serious, because we were looking at 30-year sentences. Like my twin brother didn't know I grew for decades. Like I always had weed. It was suspicious. But like I just never, you know, plausible deniability is the name of the game back then. You had to have, you know, excuses, and you know, but so I was at a party with Scott, at Ohio State, and we were packing up a bowl, and this kid walked in, and he was alarmingly straight looking, like for that party. And I was like, "Ooh, put that up, you know." And he's like, "What?" And I was like, "Put that up." And kind of nodded towards the door, and he started laughing. He goes, "Bro, that's the plug." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "That's the plug." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Are you serious?" And he was like, "Yeah, dude, that dude's the man." And I was like, "Well, holy shit, bro, he's doing it right." And like my buddy Paul always makes fun of me. He's like, "Dude," he's like, he's like, "Guys like you just want the cops to come beat you up." He's like, "I'll come smoke right beside you any day." He's like, "They're gonna hit you anyway, you know." He's like, "I'll be holding the ball, and they're still gonna take." And this guy looked like Bobby Brady, like literally, like the braces, the freckles, the like little kid haircut, the whole deal. And he looked like Bobby Brady. And so I got to know this guy, and he was super chill, like super heady kid, and he was younger than us, and he was really funny. He was really cool, fun to hang out with. He had a great tape collection, which he was real kind with, and I had amassed a pretty heady tape collection by then, and so we traded a lot of tapes and stuff. And he was like, "Man," he's like, "You need to get a light. You need to get a real light." And he's like, "Go to this store," and the store was actually pretty close to my parents' house, and they were living in Columbus, and he was like, "Go over there and tell them Bobby Brady sent you." And I was like, "Okay, so he's in on the joke too. He knows that he's, you know." And so I was like,
He
"Okay,
actually
so he's
said
doing this on
he
purpose."
said Bobby Brady.
Yeah, yeah. He said, "Tell him Bobby Brady sent you," because that's
Oh,
what we
that's too
called him,
good.
like as a
Yeah.
nick, like behind his back, kind of. But like, it wasn't like nobody talked shit about that guy. We all loved him. He was the
You
man,
know,
dude. Like
I
it was respect.
I had a thought there that, considering the way that he looked, it seems very curated. Like he was like, this is my drug dealer persona because it's so unassuming. He probably put the name out there. He was probably the one to proliferate it early, and everyone's like, "No,
Yeah, I don't know.
I just heard from a buddy. We call him Bobby Brady." And he's like, "Nope, that's just me."
No, that's just me. I'm Bobby Brady. Yeah. He embraced it, you know.
That's
But
so
so
funny.
he tells me to go to this spot, and so like I drive across town, get on a bus, get on another bus, get on a bus going back the other way, and I walk to this store, and I've got a
This is
backpack
before you
with
even
me,
get to
thinking
the
I'm gonna.
store.
Oh yeah, this is to get to the store. Yeah.
That's so
And
funny. The paranoia of the time
yeah.
is like honestly
Oh,
a
it
little bit
was
comical.
yeah. Well, it was intense because I did know
I
people
feel
that got
that.
arrested, went to prison. You know, I know a guy that got robbed, and when the cops came, you know, he got abducted. Like they tied him to a chair, and he threw himself out a second story window because they were going to kill him, and he got
That's crazy.
paralyzed. He broke his neck, and he still went to prison when they found his grow when the
What
cops
the
came. You
fuck?
know, so like we were terrified,
Yeah.
and so. But so, on a brighter note, I go to do this, go pick up this light, and I go into the store, and like I'm an old man now, and this guy was a good bit older than I am now. You know, he's like 70 years old, and pretty straight looking, and I was nervous to say anything. Like I was like, "Ooh, this is not who I was expecting." To have to tell him I needed, you know, I was here on behalf of the Bobby Brady.
What was the storefront like? What was what type of
Oh,
store
it was
was it?
just it was a plant store. It was a plant
Okay.
store, and they had traditional like fluorescent lights. They had substrates. You know, they had salt fertilizers.
Okay.
They had so it was a little grow store, but it wasn't
Okay.
it wasn't a hydro store. It was like a mom and pop plant store. Like you could
Sure.
buy
They had a lot of
a
plants for
snake
sale
plant
too.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was like, and it looked like some grandparents that just walked out of Applebee's on a Saturday afternoon who's running it. You know, they're just
Okay.
like super wholesome Midwestern Ohio meemaw peepaw. And,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm like, ooh, man, you know, and I'm in there, you know, looking like a young deadhead does. And I'm like, okay, so crap, what do I do here? And finally the guy, the peepaw came out and was like, hey man, can I help you with anything? You know, and I'm just like looking around because I'm looking for lights. I'm like, I don't see anything that I need. I got these at home. These aren't working. And I was like, let's try it. Let's just, you know, hell in a bucket. Let's go for it. And I was like, Bobby Brady told me to come in here. And he goes, oh, just a second. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And he goes in the back and he
man.
sends he sends some kid out, you know, with a ponytail. And he's like, bro, you know, and, you know, I'm not gonna say the guy's real name, but he was like, you know, Bobby Brady. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, yeah. He's like, okay. And he was like, hey, he's got my tapes, blah, blah, blah. Tell him I need those back. They were all big fish heads. And he had some fish this kid. Like they went to Europe with fish and stuff later. Like they were big into fish. And
Okay.
but so kid hooks me up with a light and I'm on my way. And so like it doesn't fit in the backpack. So like I'm trying to be low key with this box, you know. I carry it, I get on the bus, I get on another bus. I'm like leaning over it, you know, and I didn't
Does
know
it have
what
like
to
a
do. I was
picture of
so
a light on
scared.
the outside?
Yeah, it's got a picture of a light, you know, like a big, and it's got like the fake yellow light, you know, like that's printed, like shining out from it, kind of thing. And I was just like, this sucks, you know. And finally, I got back to my car. I put it in the trunk of my car. You know, I treated it like a dead body, essentially. You know, I got it in the trunk of my car, and yeah, I drove it. You know, drove home and left it until, you know, late that night. Went out and snuck out and got the light, kind of thing. But that was the game changer, you know. And my first 20 years of growing, I did salts, the whole thing, you know, and I I I think that it was good for me. I think that was really good for me to learn those basics, just like how to water, you know, how to deal with lights, how to deal with heat, you know, and everything. Every time something changes, like we've seen it, like, you know, when you switch from salt to organic, there's a lot of things that sneak up on growers. You know, CO2 is one of the big ones. You know, DHU is another really big one. Um, when we switched from HPS to LEDs, there was, you know, we're not getting that radiant heat. And so, you know, we had to figure out what that optimal leaf temp, and that means your room's hotter. And that means, you know, there's all these things. Anytime, you know, these are open systems. Anytime you flip one toggle switch, everything else is going to go with it. And so there's this cascade effect of what happens in your rooms. But that's when I got that light, is when I was like, indoor growing is the way to go, because you can do it several times a year. I was so scared. Like my parents, my dad, I should say my dad, my mom really wasn't into that. I'm sure she educated them on what to do, but like she never touched any of the weed grows ever. And, but like there were too many risks in my head for outdoor growing. Like it was just, I just, in my head, it was just going to be the sheriff waiting on you someday. You know, you were going to go pick up some plants and they'd be waiting on you. And so I was like, this indoor thing is where it's at, you know. And then a lot of experimentation, a lot of really good crappy weed, you know. Like it was so much better than what was out there, but it was still pretty bad, you know. And I was still, you know, in the 90s, I was still getting pounds of brickweed, you know. You'd find a mouse in it, a frog. It might be, you know, there might be a bunch of rocks in it just because they wanted it to weigh, you know.
That's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. The weed that we used to get in the late 80s was gross, you know. you know.
That
But there was
sounds
some
pretty
really
gross.
great weed out there too. And there was already a lot of people growing really good weed just where I was and who I was. I just wasn't tapped into it. And again, it wasn't until really I got on Dead Tour that I saw really good weed on a consistent basis. You know, like I mentioned Chaz Nelson with the Roadkill Skunk. Like, I'd never smelled weed like that in my life. And my dad was, you know, a weed connoisseur of that time and grew a lot of good weed and had access to, like, I remember he would fly out to Oregon. He had friends that grew mushrooms. He had friends that grew weed, you know. But it wasn't until Dead Tour that I had consistent access to good weed.
For sure. Um, okay, so the light changed the game for you, you know, and I feel like even nowadays you still hear people that are going from HPS to LED and they're like, oh my god, it changed the game for me because it does allow for so much of a different approach that can tend to make things easier for some, harder for others. But you said you were also doing mostly salts early on, and you know that's pretty understandable too. Probably just going with like, were you getting like liquid fertilizers or actual like dry salts and doing some like mixes yourself? Were you following specific directions out of one of these horticulture like or cannabis grow books that you had access to at the time?
So I was mostly using granulated or, you know, um, like a dry, you know, fertilizer similar to like a JR Peters or you know, something like that. And it was whatever my mom had been using for her house plants because that's what I was
Okay,
familiar with, you know. And that was, you know, running a ridiculously high EC, you know, plants would get super, you know, enormous nodes and, you know, it was um you know, like I think we've all had the unpleasant experience when you light a bowl and then you pull the lighter away and it's crackling. It's like it was just, yeah, it's way too high on the EC, but you know, it was a learning curve. Less is more. That was a really hard thing to learn, was to back off of the feeding, and then
for
things
sure.
started to go really well. And so, like, your cannabis knowledge, like, it's this, you know, but it's really like this because you learn something and then you have a horrible, and then you get your first spider mites and you're like,
For
oh
sure.
shit. and
Well, and
then
you know, like
and then you
that.
learn how to deal with that.
Yeah, and the high EC thing too, because for anybody that knows me and my growth style, I run pretty high EC, and I think that a lot of those issues that a lot of people faced early on when trying to run salts at high ECs is that the formulations of those salts weren't directly geared towards cannabis. They were like tomatoes or cucumbers or uh, house plants, like you said, some stuff with big foliage that needed a lot more nitrogen and maybe less of the micros in different ratios. You know, molybdenum was probably off, boron was probably off. All these things that we know now are so vital for cannabis, considering how hungry it is of a plant.
Also
Because
that,
like,
and not matching the environment to it, you know, because
oh yeah,
I see a lot of folks where their EC issues, they just need to turn the rest of the room up. You know, if you're gonna
hmm
run it, you know, like in organics too. Like,
yeah,
you know, I run a very, you know, I run a rocket ship, foot on the gas, and so I'm
hmm
running a hot room. I'm running my gas high, my PAR's high, everything's high, but it's because I turned the one toggle. Everything has to go with it, you know.
yeah.
Otherwise, it's not optimized.
Oh,
But so
I
I just
absolutely
I
agree.
fell in love with, you know. So like even the first shitty weed that I grew, I was just over the moon about it, and you know, kind of like when, you know, like I'm not a musician, so I've never done this to anybody, but I had a lot of friends that were musicians, and you know, you'd be sitting around and be like, hey, check out this CD I got today. And it's them, and you know, and they want to try to sneak it in on you and see what you think. And I always hated that, because like if it was bad, you know, what are you going to say about it?
Yeah.
But I would try to do the same thing with weed. I'd try to sneak my weed into the circle, you know, and be like, hey, it's not bad, right? You know, and
Looking for a little
sometimes people are like,
validation.
yeah, sometimes people would be like, this is fire. And sometimes they'd be like, oh, I don't, let's put that away, you know?
Damn it.
And so like, yeah, there's few things as humbling as cannabis, you know, like I've been at this for a really long time and I still mess up, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I see a lot of like newer growers that are like super hard on themselves, you know, you know, and now these days with, you know, semi-legal cannabis, and especially like in organics, like heavy metals, you know, these are emerging sciences. These are things that have, because of prohibition or lack of interest or whatever, just haven't been studied. And so like, you know, I had somebody take exception with something I gave them on a soil report. They got really upset and they wrote a letter to my boss, and they said, you know, a year ago, Brandon said this, but today he said this. And my response was, well, do you want me to be ego driven and hide that from you? That protects my ego, my reputation, or should I tell you that, hey, we've learned something new? You know, like perfect examples like root balls. 10 years ago, I would have called you an organic heretic if you removed your root balls, because there's so many cool things that leaving those in the beds will do. Now we know that hoplite, heavy metals, that's where the plant's going to sequester that stuff. It's going to partition it as best it can. And so if you're not pulling those, you know, your spore counts, your heavy metals, or whatever is just climbing every round.
For sure.
And so, you know, there's
But
things
it
in the
also,
Anglican church that are canon now that you used to get burned at the stake for. And so like you have to be allowed to evolve, you know, you have to be able to learn, and, you know, and to learn a lot of times means to be wrong about something that you once knew.
yeah.
There's a TED talk that I always like to mention because it was really impactful to me. This guy, and I don't even remember what the guy talked about, but at the end of it, he's like, well, in case I've wasted your time, here's something useful. He's like, keep this in mind. You don't know anything. And to prove it, he's like, raise your hand if you know something. And everybody raised their hand. He picks on the guy up front. And I can never remember his name, so I usually say Steve. And he's like, okay, so what do you know? I'm going to pick on you. You're right up front. Everybody can see. Everybody put your hands down. What do you know? And he's like, well, I know I'm Steve or Dave or whoever he was, you know. And he's like, okay, I'll go with you. How do you know that? And he's like, well, it's on my birth certificate. It's on my driver's license. It's on my paycheck. It's how I pay taxes. It's what my wife calls me. It's what my parents call me. The neighbors. I've been Steve my whole life. And he's like, okay, cool. He's like, he's got documentation. He's got first and third party witnesses that will verify it. He's got a track record to lean on. And there's nobody that really opposes it. I think we can agree to the extent that you can know something that he probably is Steve. Okay, what else do you know? And he's like, well, I know that the earth travels around the sun. He's like, perfect. That's what I'm looking for. He's like, how do you know that? He's like, have you ever done any experiments to prove that? And he's like, no. And he gets down to it. And he's like, you're repeating what the smartest person you know on that topic has to say, but you don't know it. And that's something that in cultivation, I try really hard to keep to the breast. Like, I don't know shit. I've gotta prove this stuff. These are theories, you know. A lot of the things that we take for granted in science are
Mm-hmm.
theories. You know, we know that this thing happens in this plant, and it's probably a hormone, and it probably happens because of this, but we haven't found it yet in the plant. You know, and so when the rubber hits the road, and the converse happens a lot. You know, if you take a petri dish and you put some pest in there and you put some beneficial insect in there, well, if there's nothing else to eat, yes, here we have
Yep.
some photos of this insect eating this insect. If I throw them in a greenhouse, they might all just leave. You
Yep.
know, and so you have to prove these things to yourself, and that's what I love about growing is you get the opportunity to experiment, you know, to be a
Yeah.
scientist and to have a lab.
Well, I think sometimes people kind of conflate a scientific approach with something that's absolute, where if you if you put out one thought from a scientific approach and say like, listen, to the best of my ability, I've tested this and I can say pretty thoroughly that X is true currently. But that's usually where like a lot of people then say, oh, okay, so that's it. That's the truth to it. I don't have to ever come back and readdress
The,
this. But then when new information is available and new processes synthesized and you get to a new end result, then it's not that the first uh, thing was wrong. It's just that things have changed, and you have to be able to change. Otherwise, like science is not static; it does change constantly. Um, and I think the root ball is a perfect example. And it made me think also that in the end, no matter which way you're growing, whether it be some sort of living organic substrate that you're amending with organic amendments and or if you're going with some sort of inert substrate using salts and sterility to grow a plant, in the end, you're trying to do something consistently that's repeatable. And so if you do have those root balls in there, it adds a layer of uncertainty to the equation. And so by removing them, you're probably adding in fresh substrate that is already a known quantity and known, chemistry. And so you're adding that in and you're kind of resetting almost to a baseline that's something more manageable. So I think that a lot of people can take a lot from sort of what you were just saying there, where if consistency is the goal, then where are those things that you can learn from? Yeah, people were saying forever, like, oh, I want to do a no-till organic garden, but no-till would mean something that is in like a sand, silt, and clay setting. It's not something that you do in an amended substrate. It's a different agricultural term that doesn't apply to an indoor grow. So when you're going, well, I leave the root balls because I would do that out in nature. Well, you're not in nature. You're in a controlled environment, agriculture setting, and you need to say, hey, I'm not doing nature. I'm doing nature plus.
Yeah, I'm not trying to do biomimicry because outside has cold days, rainy days, locusts. You know, I'm trying to be consistent, and because of that, I want guardrails. And you know, I liked what you said as far as we can't be dogmatic. We have to be able to be wrong to be able to evolve. And so, if we learn
Hmm.
something new, then we learn something new, and we'd be grateful for that. And you know, I work with Dr. Ben Higgins. He's the chief research scientist for KISS Organics, and he always says the current data would suggest.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not saying it. He's like, I'm looking at what the data says and, you know, extrapolating some information from that. And he's like, that could change. But
I'm a
right now,
glorified
you know,
interpreter.
yeah, yeah. So we're not speaking in absolutes. And something I mentioned, I got to be on with Chad Westport for his 200th
Oh,
podcast.
cool.
And thank you, Chad Westport. Shout out, Chad. And awesome dude.
Great
And
friend of the show.
yeah, he's an awesome human being. And uh, we were talking about, you know, because at KISS where I work, it's organics. We're very data driven and science based. We don't sell products that might help people. We sell products that have a known solution for a problem. Um, I, I see a lot of snake oil, and you know, cannabis doesn't even want to reinvent the wheel. They're just going to call it a tire and charge you twice as much for it, you know. And so
Hmm.
um, while I'm really proud that we take a science-based approach because it reduces workflows, reduces costs, you know, as a legacy grower, it breaks my heart to see farms closing doors left and right because they just can't keep the door, they just can't keep the lights on.
Yeah.
The price of cannabis to the retail, it hasn't changed to the retail buyer. And, you know, in 1986, an eighth was $50. You go to a retail store and a decent eighth is $50, and the farmers are getting nothing for it, and it's really not sustainable. But so I take a lot of pride in trying to support growers in a very fiscally responsible way. Um, but I also want to limit inputs, especially in organics, because it reduces your expenditure. It reduces your heavy metal and potential contaminants, pesticides, sodium chlorides, any bad actors. And then if something does go really right or really wrong, if you've got a really streamlined SOP, you know that thing you added last time is what made it happen. You have a
Mm-hmm.
control, so I like that stuff. Science-based doesn't mean better than, you know, it just gives you, I have some folks that get upset with me, they're like, okay, science-based. And I get that. There's Wolf Siegel, who was on, who is this amazing person, grower in the sky, Sensimilla
Mm-hmm.
tips. If folks don't know him somehow, go look him up. He's a legend.
One of our earlier
Any of the
episodes.
lighting people that are standing on his shoulders. He's one of the first people to write about indoor lighting and Sensimilla tips. So like, huge part of our U.S. cannabis story. Um, but like guys like that, they, like I know that he hates the term bro science because he's like, it was some bro doing science, and he's totally right. When I say, bro science in a disparaging way, I'm not talking about bros doing science because that's how we got here. I'm talking about uh, people pushing products that don't stand up to scientific scrutiny.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. That's
Just
or
anecdotal evidence
or
is not
people,
science.
yeah, or doing things that are going to negatively impact a grower.
Mm-hmm.
Like um, there's a lot of these are really complex, especially the organic side. It can get very complex, and for a newer grower, and even a 10-year grower being a newer grower, it would be easy um, to take advantage of somebody. And, you know, mean people suck. It's kind to be kind. Like we're potheads, and that's one of the things that legalization has done for me. It's kind of blown my mind. It's like, because I was in my little deadhead bubble forever. And just like tattooing, everybody gets tattoos. Lawyers, lawyer, judge, prostitute, gangbanger, cop, everybody. Same thing with weed. Everybody smokes weed. And so where I had been in this weird little kind of, for me, utopian bubble of shared um, moralities, shared goals, shared consciousness. It's been pretty wild to have folks from all other kinds of walks of life um, expose me to their relationship to cannabis and that sort of thing. And so it's been very eye-opening, and it's made me realize really just how diverse cannabis culture is, really. The folks that kind of kept that flame alive during Prohibition tended to be kind of the hippie deadhead scene, but everybody smoked it. You'd see that at dead shows. They didn't go into shows, but there were metal kids and punk rock kids and gangbangers, and there were all kinds of people on the lot because they knew they could score some fire there. Um, so like Natso talks about it all the time. Like it was one of the only places you consistently, you could go there and you could score and you could score a decent quantity of some good weed, you know, and so it did attract a lot of different people.
Yeah, I mean, that's important. Nobody likes smoking swag, and I never had that experience myself, but I knew that there was definitely like there's the guy's house that I would go to and get like the best flower from that, I wouldn't have associated with him outside of cannabis. But we were super chill, and I met a lot of random people there, just from picking up a sack every once in a while. So it brings people together in a weird way that's pretty beautiful, and I really like that part of the cannabis community. Just I feel like it when egos aren't too much at stake within the conversation, because we all have egos, we all say stupid shit. I feel like I can get along with people within the cannabis community way more than I can get along with, that are from completely different walks of life, completely different, even, political opinions or backgrounds, or their story could be completely different. I feel like I can get along with them a lot better than in other communities that I've experienced. So yeah, I think that that's a pretty interesting point. I would have loved to see the lot of a Grateful Dead show, just to see the diversity there and like the intermingling and sort of who's talking to who and who's smoking with who and just what the conversations are about.
It was primarily heads, you know. There was like, and there's like the whole separation of like heads and custies, like people who were there just to see the, you know, like Jerry would say, it's like sometimes you feel like you're at the zoo and you're the animals, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes people would show up just to look at the deadheads. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, but it's you know, weed is something that brings people together of all different types, and it's you know, I was laughing with a kid recently who kind of like got upset with me on social media, and my reply was just like, hey, if you love weed enough to be this passionate that you want to fight with me about it, we'd probably get along, bro.
Yeah,
So like,
right.
you know, bring it down a notch. We'd probably get along. It'll be all right.
That's funny. So let's
Yeah. So
talk a little bit more
I'm
about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm chatty, man. So you got to stop. Yeah, please
I'll,
keep me on track.
all good. Okay. I'll do my job. So that we've heard now a little bit about like your transition. So you got your early grows, you got your mid grows where you started, incorporating a better light, and you were getting better yields out of that, and more impressed with the flower quality, sharing it with your friends and stuff. So when did you then take it to the point where you were the hookup? And when was it that you like started to actually look at it as a I don't know if you like looked at it as a form of income or something that would be like a continuous part of your life as part of your I don't know, identity, or like I feel like a lot of people in the cannabis community, especially those who have a passion for the plant but then also use it for income, there's this weird uh there's this weird area where it's like I love it but also it's a job now. And so like since you are within like the cannabis peripheries now doing the agronomy work for Kiss Organics, was there a point where it was like a primary source of income for you? Were you, uh, I mean, we had the story from the beginning where you were ready to hook up this famous chef because he was sent to you for the connect, and so there must have been some level of knowledge that you had the goods, so to speak.
Yeah, I have a very definitive moment. Like I've mentioned Scott Pansing before, this friend of mine, and we were, I don't know, we were probably like 30 years old, 28, 29, 30, somewhere in there. And we were like, man, there's going to be a point in our lives where we're we're going to have to be self-sustaining on this cannabis thing. Like the penalties are too, you know, like I can remember like going to Cleveland to see the Dead at Rich Stadium, and they would have cops with binoculars up on top of the stadium, and that place was laid out like a grid, and they would literally like be watching with binoculars and, you know, go to A12 and sink that battleship, you know, and they would just, the paranoia was like really bad. And one, we had kind of figured out how to do like some decent weed, you know, and replicable. And one, it was all, you know, another thing, it was expensive, you know. You could maybe get a break and get an ounce for 350 of something that was really fire, but in, you know, 86, you know, 88, $350 was more than I was paying for rent for 2 months, you know.
Damn.
So that was a lot of money. And
Yeah.
so it
For an
did
ounce.
bring in income because, you know, an ounce was 350 all day long. And that was a lot of money. Like
Yeah.
that could get you way down the road. And so for a lot of people, it did become like a way to make money, to maintain a lifestyle. And I definitely, I definitely had long stretches. I've always been like a hustler. Like I hustle. Like I've always had a job. You know, I've always been doing something to generate money. But I was also always growing cannabis, and I smoke a lot of weed, but you always end up with a little extra. And I would, you know, I would pass it on to folks, and so it never felt like a job. Um, it's never, you know, still it doesn't feel like a job. It's never felt like a job.
That's awesome.
Even at its worst, you know, like I had a horrible experience. You know, I had a hemp farm in South Carolina, and it was one of the best worst experiences of my life. Um, it was horrible in so many ways, um, but I still got to hang out with the plant. I still got to learn about the plant. I still got to put touches in every day, and so you know, without that experience, I wouldn't be at Kiss. You know, and then Kiss has opened up a huge world to me of not only wonderful people that I can now, you know, work with and, you know, chat with, and, you know, people like yourself, people like Gabby, people, there's a lot of people that, you know, Green Bodie's been incredibly kind to me. The folks over at Crockett Farms, you know, have been, you know, Brian especially, have been really kind to me. So there's been some really, you know, really wonderful folks that have been like super nice to me that I never expected to be in the same room with, kind of thing. And so
Yeah.
that's been really cool. But the thing about Kiss that I love is, you know, yeah, I hustled a lot of pounds. I grew a lot of weed. I grew a lot of weed, and it went really far, and you know, it's put a roof over my kid's head. It's done everything for me, and I'm super grateful. But like, Kiss has given me an opportunity where like I can help a lot of growers, because I've killed a lot of plants. You know,
Sure.
if it's stupid and you can do it with cannabis, I've probably done it. You know, I've probably killed the plant.
Oh,
that
I
way.
feel that.
And if I can provide the remedy, you know, it's a really nice spot to be in. You know, I just broke protocols, my quarantine protocols, for the first time in like 20 years, and got root aphids. And, you
Oh,
know, and now I've had all the bugs. Now I've had them all, you know.
was that the first
And
time you
so
got root
it's,
aphids?
yeah. And so, yeah, because I'm super uptight. People know me. Like, you're stepping out of your shoes into the room, into a Tyvek suit. You're stepping into bleached Crocs. There's positive pressure on the door. Hands are being sprayed with alcohol. And this is after I've grilled you about your morning. Like, did you take a shower? Did you walk your dog? Did you, you know, anything get kicked out, you know? And so I'm really uptight, and I did it to myself, So,
Mm,
it's a good reminder, follow your own rules.
yep.
But I was talking to Dr. Ben, and he's like, well, man, he's like, I hate to say this. He's like, and I was like, no, I know where it's going already. I was like, if you get russets, call me. I can get russets out of a 7,200 square foot greenhouse with 8-foot plants. I got you. If,
Yeah.
now I feel like that about root aphids. Like, I got you. We can get rid of them. It's going to suck. You're going to hate it, but you can
It's
get rid
gonna
of them.
take a lot of work.
In a lot of time. Root aphids are
Yep.
not going to go away overnight. Like
No.
it's
Get get
unless
ready
you've
to
got
do
kryptonite.
yeah, get ready to do 3 treatments a week for the next 2 months. And then just maybe you might have
Yeah,
them gone. Oh yeah,
maybe.
no, I've
Yeah,
I've dealt with
yeah.
root aphids a few times, and they're probably my least favorite bug to get rid of. Spider mites, no problem. Russet mites, like you said, no problem. Even canopy aphids, no problem. That's I can deal with that. I've dealt with
Thrips.
it. Thrips, just
I don't.
just spray more frequently. You're just gonna slowly get rid of those unless you can throw some spinosad in there. But if you can't, which most of us can't, then you just need to up your Azagard sprays.
All right. You can
um,
do if for the organic folks, you can do Bovaria and nematodes in the soil. You
yep.
can do. I use Epishield tank mix with Bovaria. So I'll take like a Botanigard
Okay.
WP for wettable powder. I'll mix that with Epishield or Sufoil X, which is the same thing as Monterey horticultural oil. But I'll tank mix those together, so I get the suffocant and I get the the fungal uh, protection.
For sure.
So I get
Yeah,
a
that's the.
knockdown and I get some long.
I feel like that's the good old like Suzanne uh, spray down for
Wait,
so
yeah,
many things,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it just works so well. Um, so let's see.
She's the gold
You know,
standard. We're lucky that she
she is.
messes with us. Yeah.
I feel like anytime that I need to redo like just some pest primers, I'll just re-listen to the Kiss episodes with Suzanne, and I'll be like, okay, I'm
With
ready.
her.
I'm ready to go. Um, okay, so
He did
I
some.
wanted.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say
Okay.
we did a conference in Montana. We're doing again this year, and she was there last year. She'll be there again this year. But the like we had to agree not to record her, and it kills me because I'm like, I don't even want to share it with anybody. She puts out so much information
Yeah.
that I could listen to it 8 times and pick up something new every time. So, but go ahead. You
Agreed.
were going to say something. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. I feel like we've gotten through most of your backstory, and I think a lot of people know kind of where you are currently with Kiss. I believe that you talked about that a little bit when you and Gabby did the show. And so, what I kind of want to do is give you an opportunity here to go over how you would set up let's call it a 4x4 tent. Um, because I feel like a 4x4 tent is the most scalable uh,
Yep.
unit, right? Like it's the smallest unit that we can then scale up to all the way into a facility size if need be. Because for the most part, environmental parameters are pretty straightforward. Like there's going to be different modes of action on the environment based on a tent versus a larger space or a lung room or anything like that, and that's super situationally dependent. So we don't need to get into environment too much. But if you were to say build a 4x4 tent for yourself, or if somebody reached out to Kiss and they're like, just build me a 4x4 tent, send Brandon out to build me a 4x4 tent so that I can grow some fire of my own, what would you do?
So if I'm doing it for myself, obviously you want to pick a style that is hopefully sustainable. That's one of my goals with growing. I know that doesn't matter to everybody, but That's important to me. Everybody
Well,
should
they
be
are reaching
thinking
out to
about
you, so let's assume that they're going
okay,
organic.
so yeah, they want to be
Yeah.
sustainable. Yeah. You want something that is an SOP that you can afford. These days, there's kind of limitless things that people will suggest you add to your grow as secret sauces. I'll just tell you right now, after, I mean, forever with cannabis, the secret sauce is time. Good genetics and time is the secret sauce. You put in the time and your plants will love you back. If you ignore them and half-ass them, then that's what you'll get back out. It's time. Time and love is what is the secret sauce. That's all there is to it. But so if I'm going to set something up, I want it to be sustainable. I want it to be something that I can afford. Back in the day when we get $4 to $6 grand a pound, that didn't matter. These days, facilities are selling pounds for $500. Everything matters. And then it should be fun. You should choose a path that's fun. Like you can you could go out and like you want to go get a deer as a hunter. Like a hunter goes out and gets a deer. And so there's a certain hunter that will go buy a rifle at a store and sit up on a ridge 200 yards away, and they're really into the tech of the rifle, and they're really into the scope, and that's the thing that they really, and they kill a deer. There's another person who will go find a tree and cut it down and cure the wood for a year, build a bow, have to learn how to track, and that's a whole different set of skills and interests. And so both of those guys end up with a deer. They both enjoy the deer. How they got there is very different. And so there's a lot of things in cannabis. Like I've done, like I did a lot of propagation for HBCUs in the Southeast out of my farm. And we would do rounds of 20, 40,000 cuts at a time, And so like I had a mattress in my greenhouse because I just couldn't even spare the extra hour to go home, I just, it was a lot of work. And so there's, defoliating, clones, there's certain things in cannabis that are, tedious, for lack of a better word. And people will be like, man, this is monotonous. And I'm like, oh, wait till you have a good harvest and and you're sitting in
me in
trail
5 years.
and trim jail for a couple of months straight, wishing that you hadn't done so well because you got to trim it all. And so like it's got to be fun. And so if you don't enjoy that style of growing, look into some other ways of growing. I had a guy call me this week and super frustrated, and he's like, I just don't think I should be an organic grower. I'm like, well, then don't.
Yeah. Call me.
I'm not dogmatic
I'll
about how anybody grows. Yeah. Because I'm not, and I mean, I've got 20 years of salts. I'm teaching my brother how to grow right now, and I started him off on salts because I wanted him to learn some basics about growing that it's easy to kind of skip over. And organics doesn't always treat it. There's certain things like pH and that sort of thing that people don't. pH matters, whether it's in organics or salts, because the uptake is ionic regardless, and so it does matter. And so, is there a big buffer? Can you get away with things that you can't? Yeah, fully, but it matters. And your plant is going to use its energy to fight a salt gradient for sodium and chlorides. It's going to fight osmotic stress. It's going to fight pH. Your plant's going to do things to expend its energy, or it could take that energy and spend it on secondary metabolites. I know where I want mine to go. And so, there's things you can get away with, and then there's things to optimize. And it just depends on how far you want to get into it. And at what level is your brain satiated? That's one of the things I love about organics is I've got a really curious brain I can't turn off. And there's no end to the puzzles. There's just literally no end to the puzzles.
You can chase rabbit holes in organics to the nth degree
forever. Yeah. And so I enjoyed that. And but so if I was setting up a grow, and I'm literally doing this right now, I sent my brother a light and a tent, and I sent him a 4x8 tent because I do worry about, especially newer growers with 4x4 tents, because what are we all trying to do? We're all trying to max it out. We want to get as much return as we can because we love it so much. And so we want to get a bunch of really good herb. And so we pack that 4x4 out and we lose half of it because of mold or something. And so, and so I want him to have success. So I gave him a 4x8 and said, let's put a 4x4 right in the middle of it. My brother's had some really serious injuries from sports. And so he's limited his mobility. And so it would make things a lot easier for him as well. My buddy Jeff is the same way, where he's in confined to a wheelchair sometimes, and so he has a hard time. So it's important to leave room for those guys to get in on either side. But with a 4x4 tent, I would do a 4x4 bed. I would put it on, obviously temperature on your floor is really important. That's one of the things that will lock nitrogen out faster than anything, and no amount of pouring more on is going to help if that temperature is not right. And so I insulate my beds off the floor with rigid foam or something, so that they're not impacted by swings. This is for somebody's, I'm just thinking in my head, this is for somebody's basement grow, and
for sure,
and half the country's frozen right now, and so you would want to have it insulated up off the ground. And then I would want a tray underneath that. That's going to help with a bunch of things. That's going to keep you from flooding your basement. It's going to keep you, it's going to enable you to flush. It's going to enable you to easily rehydrate a peat-based substrate that will be hydrophobic if you shut down for a round or two and it gets dry. Because you have the ability to wick back up with capillary action. And so those are all really important things. And then I would want a good quality fabric 4x4 bed to sit in that tray. I like Grassroots. I'm partial to them because we work with them. And, like somebody was, Tad Hussey, the owner and founder of the company I work for, Kiss Organics, is really good about being brand agnostic. We're all very happy with the products that we have developed and we offer and that kind of stuff, but he's open to use whatever's got the least carbon footprint for you, whatever's the most fiscally responsible. But we do recommend our stuff a lot of times because we've tested it.
Sure.
And in organics, pesticides and heavy metals are a really big concern. And so I know that Grassroots beds are not going to fail somebody for mercury,
sure,
or arsenic or lead, something like that. And so that's the only reason I'm dropping a brand.
I will agree that whenever I've
so
done organics, I've used grassroot fabric pots. And the reason being for me is that it was a humidity thing. And the 3/4 plastic lining on the sides greatly reduces the transpiration from the fabric pots out into the environment. And so I have a much more controllable environment, humidity wise specifically, which when I was just running like, I don't know, whatever no name brand fabric pots I could get at the local nursery, I just couldn't keep the humidity down. It was damn near impossible. And when I did, the pots would dry out too quickly, and you start to get some like lockout issues and stuff.
Even when I go into facilities, I'll see folks that have Grassroots beds that are the really old ones that because they've been running our soil for 12 years straight or something.
Sure.
And they've gone back, wrapped all their beds with plastic. You can see where they've gone and wrapped them all. That's the same reason. So that's a great point. But so then you've got your scalable unit. You've got your insulation, whatever that is. You've got your tray, your bed. Those beds are typically 2 feet tall. I would fill it with a really good quality, well-drained and tested substrate. You can make your own substrate. That's always an option. I'm not a fan of the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, the Coots or the Cornell mix that a lot of organic folks start off with. And the reason I don't love that is just because 1/3 compost is a really heavy, mucky substrate. And
Yeah.
I like to you know, after 4 decades, I want to play. I want to put things in my soil. There's a lot of stuff I do put in my soil, and if my soil doesn't dry down, I can't do that. And so I like, you know, 15, 10% even compost. And so I would do, you know, but you would get your substrate that you wanted. I would only fill it 10 to 12 inches. That's going to save you a bunch of money. There's some folks that will be like, oh, you got to do 2 feet. And they're just trying to sell you more stuff to put in it. That's going to make your irrigation more difficult. If there's a real easy visual experiment you can do. You can take a beer glass that's tall and thin, and you can take a Scotch glass that's short and wide, and fill them both up with sand. And then you put the same volume of water based off of, you know, percentage volume based off of the volume of the sand, and then wait a little bit. And that beer glass that's tall and narrow, it's going to be pretty wet on the bottom and pretty dry on top. It's important in organics that we don't have to keep that top inch wet, but we do need to keep the bed fairly uniformly moist because we want the biology to be happy and to be doing our cycling. We've added these middlemen to our system, and we have to keep them happy. And you don't want to give them too much because then you drown them and you get anaerobes and it's this whole other thing. But so the Scotch glass, if you look at it, it's going to be pretty uniformly moist. And so that height to, it's, what's the inverse square law? You know, your volume and your area are going to be much improved using a shallower bed. And so 10 to 12 inches would be optimal. Planting count, we want to fill a canopy, right? And so if you're going to do multiple plants, you know, especially your first couple of grows, I would highly recommend monocropping 1 cultivar, you know, at least, just so that you don't have, you know, this giant plant and then half your bed's shaded out, and those plants never really turn into anything. So you want to learn your cultivars, but you would pick a cultivar. You know, if it was your first time growing, you might put 1 plant right in the middle of that bed and take a couple of weeks to grow that plant out and fill that canopy. If you've been growing for a while, you might really want to get to it, and you've put 12 plants in that bed. You know, we've found through testing, and we've got data, again, you know, we do a lot of testing and gathering of data farming along with cannabis farming, that in a 4x4, 9 plants is kind of optimal. As far as getting your turnaround time, and, you know, because, you know, we want to do a bunch of cycles, so we don't want a bunch of downtime.
And you have so much more.
You can usually do about.
So you have so much more to consider there in terms of downtime in an organic bed, because you're not moving organic beds from room to room. So, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Nine plants to a light.
We want to be proactive growers, regardless of what, you know, salt, organic, you know, whatever. You know, we want to be proactive. We don't want to be reactive, because that means something happened, and that means we've lost something.
Yep. Yeah, but nine plants to a light is perfect.
So we do 9 plants usually, and then, you know, and that's genetics specific. You know, there's some genetics you want to do sea of green, and you really want to pack them in there, and there's others you want to scrog, and it comes down to, you know, managing your time and your space and how fast you want to finish that canopy. Something I love about, I got some really good, you know, autos have come a long way. I got some really killer autos from Crockett Family Farm last year. But I don't do autos inside. I love photoperiod plants. The fact that I can hold it indefinitely in veg, the fact that I can hold a plant until it's just so, you know, I don't want to go into flower until my plants are perfect, because you're not going to fix it in flower. You're just going to lose. And so that's important to me. But so once you've established your canopy, and we're moving up in the tent, you're obviously going to need some sort of fans to move air. You know, I've always been a big fan of if you can't see the leaves move even the slightest bit, you need more airflow. You want, those are microclimates that, if two leaves, God forbid, if two leaves get to hang out like this for too long, you'll get a fungal pathogen there. It's on that note, I think every grower should be working with silica, salt, organic. I don't care what you're doing. Silica should be a part of your game if you're in cannabis. Like, that's just a dunk. That's one of the few things I think everybody. So two approaches. So I add willastonite to the soil. Willastonite will raise your pH, but really, really, really slowly. And so really, because most of the natural action in the soil, because of higher CO2, biology, chemistry, almost all of that drives your pH down in the soil. And so to have that willastonite just kind of in the background as a little safety, as a little buffer, is really nice. We tend to, obviously run higher pH in organics. It's like 6.8 to 7 instead of like the 5.8 to 6.2 for salts kind of deal. We do that for a variety of reasons. One, that's going to keep you from having a trace toxicity, but it really reduces heavy metal uptake. And so that's one of the reasons we do that. I guess next we need a light. I work with several lighting companies. I'm not going to say, if anybody wants to talk lights, let me know. But like, I work with several lighting companies. I think everybody works with several lighting companies. But in general, I'm very happy with the I use the lights from one of the companies that we work with, and I'm very happy with them, and I've been happy with them for years. So I will say that, and I've used a lot of people's lights, and so I am really happy with these. Knock on rocks, they've not given me troubles, and
feel free to drop the name of the light that you're enjoying. We're not sponsored by anything for this show.
Well, I work with a couple of different companies. The lights that I'm using right now are the BIOS Endeavors. Cool. And I really like them. Tad's using some BIOS lights as well in his home grow. But yeah, so I've been really happy with them. But you want something that's going to give even par. I know that spectrum matters, but so does efficiency per watt. And so there's a lot to unpack there about lighting. But you just want to find an efficient, safe light. Some people want to be able to dim. Some people don't care. I think in a tent, it's more important to be able to dim than in a room. I've got 12-foot ceilings in my room. I could just raise a light if I needed to reduce the impact of the light. In a tent, you're maxed out on, LEDs were a big game changer in tents, because hanging an HPS with this much hood, you had to flower those plants immediately in tents. Mm-hmm. But now with the LED, you've got a lot more headroom, but you still want to, start those plants fast, because you'll run out of headroom. And then, some fans to move air, but inside the tent. But, I know a lot of folks use little computer fans and stuff, and those seem to be adequate. Little clip-on fans work too. And then you need some sort of, are you going to run CO2? Then you need, a little setup with a sniffer and a way to, get CO2 in your tank or into your tent. In most cases, because of organics, you're going to have plenty of CO2 in that tent anyway, so you probably don't need it. More importantly, what I think would take precedent over that as far as priorities for me would be able to evacuate high humidity from that tent. And so if anything, I'd want a controller based on temperature and humidity that you could evacuate that room. And you can get some really simple, like I've got a little Trojan set up. I don't even have my CO2 plugged into it right now. It's just temperature and humidity. And for a tent, that's really important. That's because it's like, you want to set people up for success. If their whole first crop rots, they might not grow again, or might not grow again for a long time. And that's not what you want. You want them to have success. I'd rather somebody, who's learning to grow, shoot for less total harvest metric and just really learn the ins and outs and get the quality down. And then, because, if God forbid you ever move over into, working in a facility, there's going to be somebody on the capital side every day saying, stick another plant in there, stick another plant in there. And there is a tipping point where you can only have so much biomass to so much infrastructure before you're going to have just a total loss.
Yep.
Yeah,
a good thing
and then clean it.
If they're interested more in that, leaf area index.
Sorry, I missed that.
Oh, no worries. If anybody wants to, what you were just talking about, about like what your environment can handle and how much total canopy you have, a good metric to look up there is a term called leaf area index. And that's basically like the square footage of leaves per cubic foot of space. And it allows you to sort of gauge the rate at which your plants are going to transpire a certain volume per hour of moisture into the air. And that helps you adjust your heating load, your cooling load, as well as your dehumidification capacity requirements. It's a good small metric that expands into a much larger thing that helps understand sort of the environment's interactions with the plants on a different way than just lighting, irrigation, and things like that. I think it's a fun, different way to look at it.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool way to look at it. I think for like a newbie grower, just get a VPD chart and figure out where you want your optimal temperatures and then adjust your humidity to coincide with it. And
for sure.
That'll keep you out of trouble.
Yep. And remember, if your temperatures swing or your humidity swings, as long as your VPD is pretty steady, you're going to be pretty good.
And not all VPDs are equal. Like, yes, it will keep you out of pathogen trouble, which is why we primarily pay attention to it. But like, I went to a facility one time where like I was shivering, like my knees were knocking, and I usually wear shorts into facilities because I assume they're going to throw me in a Tyvek suit, because they should. But these guys are like, oh no, you're cool. And I'm like, no. I'm like, you should insist on it, and but so I'm freezing in there and I'm like, what's the temp in there? And the grower rolled his eyes at me, and the owner or whatever grabbed me by my arm and pulled me out into the hallway, and he's like, 60 degrees and 40, whatever the relative humidity. He's like, perfect VPD. And I was like, for pathogen resistance, yes. For growing anything at all, no. I was like, if you want to get more than an 8th out of this room, like I'd bump that up, buddy. And so like, you want to start with your leaf temp and go from there. And I think that's a really great place for like a beginner grower to start.
Agreed. Well, last thing to wrap up sort of your new grow build. How do you like to approach irrigation? Either for yourself or for if you're setting it up for a new grower, what would your approach be?
So for a new grower, a lot of times I would recommend like large, like grassroots pots instead of a bed, because once a bed's in there, it's not going anywhere. It's a lot of work to get it in there. It's a lot of work to get that soil back out. Dealing with root aphids, I just removed some soil, and it's a lot of work. And irrigation, I like for new growers to learn how to water. I think watering and curing are the two areas where the art and science of cannabis meet the hardest and can be the hardest to teach people how to do. So I like to be able to do pot lifts, something that you can pick up. And so, and then hand watering with trays underneath them is a good way to go for the first couple of rounds. You can definitely move on to things like blue mats or, some sort of automated irrigation. You always want to take the proper safety precautions and have overflow valves and things like that so that you don't flood your basement. I don't know any growers that don't know what the sound of wet socks getting thrown on a concrete floor sound like. It's everybody's had a flood. It's a horrible thing. But yeah, so you want to be careful with it. But yeah, I like for folks to learn how to water in like 10-gallon pots. You can do a water only round. I prefer a 30-gallon. Like, I think once you hit 30 gallons, the magic really starts to happen.
Agreed.
Below 10 gallons, you're going to have to feed, most likely. And I also like to mess with a lot of long flowering plants, and so you're not going to get 12 weeks out of a 10-gallon either. So like 30 gallons kind of where I feel the magic starts to happen. But I do like for folks to learn how to hand water. I like for folks to do the squeeze test, like, learn to do that. I think that most folks, we think intuitively that a pot fills up from the bottom the same way a glass does, because we've been pouring water into glasses our whole lives. And there's two forces with water. There's gravity and there's capillary action. And the capillary action with water, because it's a polar molecule, it wants to grab hold of, that's why, you can get that little bubble on the top of a glass of water, because the water molecules are attached to each other. And so it's going to grab hold of any organic matter, any solid surface that it can. And so a pot waters from the top down. And so a lot of times you'll think you've got your pot well saturated, and it's just the top inch or two. You dig down a little bit. And so, you really want to play with your pots, poke your pots from the bottom, from the top, start off with smaller pots and work your way up. I see a lot of growers, the hardest time to water is obviously when plants are small, because they're in, either in a container that's too big and they're drowning, or they're in a container that's too small that dries down too fast and they're crispy. So that's an area where people really need to be careful. But yeah, so, blue mats and that kind of stuff, while I love them, I wish we'd had blue mats. There were shows I missed because I had to, I couldn't leave. I couldn't leave these plants. And so blue mats, I would have caught a couple more shows for sure, but yeah. I think learning to water is crucial. I've got my brother doing pot lifts right now, just so he can learn, the difference between a totally dry pot and a dry pot's got a little bit of weight to it. I've been to plenty of facilities where plants, they're like, oh no, it's got some weight to it. I'm like, this plant is dry as a bone. It needs water. And then the watering strategies are different, where we're kind of shooting for some dry back with an ionic approach. We want a more homogeneous approach to our soil moisture at all times. One, that keeps the trace elements in solution and available. And then two, we want to keep that biology happy. So we want less of a dry back. We do, dry back towards the end of a round, but it's a different process.
Right.
So, anytime you change something, it's going to, these are open systems. It'll change everything else. We touched on the CO2, the humidity, it's going to change everything.
Yeah. And I think that's a pretty good, well-rounded explanation in terms of just how you would approach a new tent. Like, I think a couple of the key points that you brought up are, like, substrate size is extremely important. So for you yourself, you're going with a larger substrate, a 4x4 bed filled about a foot deep, so that you have a significant amount of total square footage of substrate there. It allows for a lot more homogeneity within the substrate, like you're talking about with the capillary action for the irrigation practices. You can have a more homogeneous water level within that large substrate, where if one plant, say, does start pulling a lot more water, has a more robust root system than another plant next to it, that plant next to it isn't all of a sudden going to become overly saturated, because that water is going to be moving across the substrate and being used by the plant that's actually pulling it up. So it does give you a little bit more wiggle room there. But also, like you were saying, if you were just starting someone off, you would want them to be in one pot, so that they were really focusing on that one pot, giving it their attention, looking for, when it did require water versus when it might need another day to let it sit or not. And I do like the suggestion of around a 30-gallon pot is where the magic happens, especially when doing living soil, where you can just fill that pot with whatever your favorite local living soil is, and you can just go water only, and maybe 2-3 cups of water a day, and that'll probably carry you all the way through once you have it at a good saturation level. Let's see, and then yeah, lighting, pretty straightforward. You
And
got
can
or
I,
you're
just the way that we got to the beds, or the way that Kiss got to the beds, was when Tad started Kiss, he started the formulations for our water only soil, our first soil. He started those formulations with Justin McGill from Go Farms, who's like a brother from another. He's a good friend, but he's also he'll hate me for this, so I'm going to do it because he's a good friend. He's incredibly humble. He's easily one of the best organic growers on the planet. Like, I'm just going to throw him into the ring, and he's going to hate me for that. But just consistent, every round, consistently, some of the most unbelievable flower. And I mean, decades of consistency, just round after round, despite every possible thing that can go wrong in a grow. He's just an amazing organic grower, just top shelf.
very
But
cool.
him and his friend and Tad's friend, Jai Palmer, who's rest in peace, left way too soon. A brilliant grower, organic grower. They worked on the first formulations together, and they were growing in fabric pots, in big pots, and they just started cramming them more and more pots onto these tables.
Oh, I know the story.
And
Yeah.
they started realizing, that they were growing through the bags into the
Yep.
other. They were all growing, and they were like, okay, we need to just do a big bed, this same height, and they were off and running. And that was really when the light came on.
For sure.
And
Yeah,
I'm
no,
sorry, you were
I
going to talk about lights.
no, it's totally fine. I appreciate the input. I think that it is really important to know that that root interaction is it adds a different layer to the growing process that in some cases can be extremely beneficial, like you're talking about, where they're just growing in, so it's creating this sort of homogeneity between the pots where all the plants are sort of working synergistically on this. Because I had another guest on the show, and we constantly are referring to these plants as water pumps. They're basically pumping water from the ground into the air, and so if you have more pumps acting upon a larger volume of substrate, then you're going to have a more uniform response across that entire substrate, rather than if each individual plant pump is in a separate pot and they're separated by solid plastic or space or whatever that may be. You're going to have completely different responses, and the uniformity is really amazing when you get into these larger pots, so that overwatering becomes less problematic on a plant by plant basis. Yes, you can overwater the entire substrate, and then you're going to see it across the entire canopy, so it's going to be a little bit more obvious that that's the problem. But it does allow for so many little
Overwater,
nuances.
pH, so many
Hmm.
things get
Yeah.
easier as the volume goes up because the buffer gets bigger. And then organics requires, as opposed to salts, where you could just, you could just do you could just miss the roots. You could do rock wool. You can do it in a very small space and deliver the fertility directly to the roots. With organics, you need a fairly good size volume of substrate to hold all of the fertility that you need, so that it's available all the time. Because if your plant's showing symptoms, it's asking for something, then it's we've lost something there. And then you need a significant volume to hold the biology you need to cycle all of that. And so I see a lot of folks that try, they're going from salt to organic for whatever reason, and they're trying to do it in 1 gallon pots, and they're like, this just doesn't work. This just doesn't work. And it does work, but not particularly well in that 1 gallon, unless you're going to do, unless you're just going to feed fish hydrolysate. And that's not really a, sustainable organic practice.
No.
That's a great liquid Band-Aid if you need it, and I have a jug of it. I've got some Pacific Grow in my room. If I need it, it's there. I never have to use it,
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to be stuck to that for my fertility.
For sure. Yeah, and so then I guess the other thing I was going to say is, lighting, again, another thing that's very subjective. Like you're using BIOS, I use like EST Tech and Spec Grade, and I've used Science LED and God, so many different LED companies. Most of them are
Black Dog. There's so
Yep.
many.
Gavita.
And there's
just too
already
many.
so many that come and gone. Yeah.
Yep. But for the most part, one of the things that I really like is something that I heard from Dr. MJ Coco from the Growing with Your Fellow Growers podcast. He was talking because he does a lot of light testing, or he did a lot of light testing. I'm not sure if he still does that, but he was just saying, for the most part, a lot of these LEDs are using very similar chips. So you really just want to know what the manufacturing practices are, if it's a high quality LED, and if they uphold their warranties and stuff like that. Because in the end, most LEDs should last you more than 5 years. And if they aren't, then you just want a company that's going to get you a new light as soon as possible because it's a manufacturer fault or error. So LEDs are just pretty great. Most of them are have some level of similarity to them. Like you were saying, spectrum can change, or the ability to up or decrease the percentage of light can change. How that interfaces with a different controller can change, but for the most part, it's a light.
There are differences, and it depends on your goal. Like when we talk about what's good herb, like that's different to everybody. Like what people want, and with lights.
Mhm.
Efficiency might not matter to a home grower that's only got 1 or 2 lights. Like spectrum and being able to play with secondary metabolites and that kind of thing might be more important to them.
Mhm.
For a facility, efficiency's gotta work out for them. And so
Yep.
they're so something middle of the road is good for most people, but you do want to consider your specific environment and what your considerations and projected outcomes that you want are, and then pick a light that will do that for you. And customer
sure.
service is everything when it comes to lights. You want, if you're a facility, you want a lighting company that is got a rebate person on staff who will talk to your electric company and figure out if, I see a lot of people like start cannabis facilities not realizing if they were 1 county over, if they were across the street, they'd get rebates on their lights. They would get rebates on their energy consumption for being, responsible with it. They might have, have heavy mercury across the street and not where they,
Mhm.
check your water, check your rebates. If you're going to do a facility, there's some things you want to check before you ever think about, hanging your name on an address.
100%. That's a very important thing that people should consider. Yeah, the rebates alone is crazy. You can go into if you're doing 200, 300 light facility. I know that's kind of on the upper end of the scale. It'll make or break you. That'll put an extra $4,500 or $450,000 in your pocket, which is insane. Well, man, I think we've covered pretty much everything in terms of getting to know more about your grow style, how you approach the grow, the background of why you grow, and where you sort of learned what you learned, and the journey that you took to get to where you are now. Was there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to touch base on?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm a chatty dude and I've got lots of weird stories and fun stuff, but yeah, I love weed, and I love growers. Growers are my tribe. This is the only club I'll ever admit to being in, but growers are my tribe. And if I can help a grower, I will. Um, I do get a little overwhelmed because I do have a lot of people that reach out to me on a regular basis, and but I do try to get back to everybody. I'm on Instagram, but I don't. If you want to get in touch with me, email me at Brandon at kisorganics.com, and I'm happy to help people. But don't get mad if I don't answer a DM. I can't. It's just overwhelming. It's just too much.
For sure.
So yeah.
I can empathize with that. But yeah, same with me. Anybody ever have a question, feel free to reach out anytime on Instagram. I'm Mr. Wolf Grows. Brandon is Tatusadu on Instagram. And, I like to wrap these up with sort of some of the ubiquitous cannabis podcast questions. So one of these first little wrap up questions is going to be what is your favorite strain or cultivar of all time?
All time, real roadkill skunk to me tastes better than anything I've ever had. Anybody that says they've got it just never had it, in my opinion. And if you do have it, holler at your boy. I'll apologize for the rest of your life. But yeah, unfortunately, I think that one's gone. And then sour diesel, just there's no comparison for me. I just adore that one. That's where my palate's at. I like gas. I like lemon. I like that kind of stuff. I like skunk. As far as things that I've built, I've got a cultivar named for my dog, Bagheera, and that was my best friend for 16 years, and that was my homie. We spent like maybe 4 or 5 nights apart in 16 years. That was my best friend, and I've made a lot of crosses. And in the same way that like nobody'd ever be good enough to date your daughter kind of thing, like there's no strain I've ever made but I did a Gary Payton Animal Mints times peanut butter cup donkey butter a couple years ago, and it just checks all the boxes. It's purple, it's triked out, it's skunky and gassy, it gets you really irie. And I think it does her some level of justice. So I'm really happy with that one.
That sounds good.
I've got a pretty extensive mom collection, and it's mostly I've got obviously Gabby. I've got a bunch of stuff from him. I've got his box set, and the Kim from him, the Kim from Craig, but I've got some, I've got Not-So's, Gabby's, the original, but I've also got like the 96, the Albany, the Wing Wang. So I've got like kind of everybody's sour that you can get hold of, that I can get hold of. I know there's folks that got them that I can't get to, but I've got most of them. And I've got some hazes that I like. I've got a Venom Runts, which is not near usually my kind of herb, that is just out of this world. When you crack a jar of that, it's one of those head turners. The whole room turns around. It's unreal.
I love that.
I love that. Yeah, but I've got a Platinum OG that's like my dad's mom. She had a little room off the carport, and it's where she kept her lawnmower and her tools and stuff. And that's where we would hide. That's where you could sneak away from people and hide and smoke. And that it's not gasoline, but it's what a room smells like that gasoline's been in.
Mm-hmm. It's like oil wood.
It's that. It's that, and it's Lemon Pledge, and it's just out of this world.
For sure. Auto shop in the
too
bathroom.
many to name. Yeah. but yeah, just too many, too many to really say. But I sour diesel. If I was gonna say one that I could take to a desert island, it'd be sour D.
For sure. I think that's a
What about
great
you?
answer. And for me, my favorite, oh man. If I look back on it, there was so there was this time in the early 2000s where uh like Girl Scout cookies first hit the Bay Area.
Yeah,
And I grew up in like South Oakland. San Leandro is where I'm from, and I remember I think it was 2009. I think it was the animal cookies had just been released, or wherever whoever had what they were calling animal cookies, and I remember me and my buddy got like an ounce of it, and we must have smoked like almost the whole ounce in one night because it was just so good, and we were breaking the buds apart, and it was the first time either one of us had seen where the trichomes were so sticky still that it was creating the little strings
right.
of resin between the bud. And it
Yeah,
was just this purple, pink, green mixture, frosty, smelled like, uh, like a bag of Jolly Ranchers, how it's just a bunch of different fruity flavors, but it's like chemically fruity. And it was that with like a
right.
lot of fuely gas to it as well. I still remember it. It was like one of the like it had to be such a fresh batch that was just cured and trimmed, and it was damn near perfect. I love that
I've
stuff.
had I've
Fruit, so good.
I've had some amnesia haze that was like time warp. 6 hours would go by, and you'd be like, "How the hell did I get here?"
Yeah.
Like, I know I smoked at Greg's this morning. How did I get here? Just unreal. Silver Pearl was some of the laughiest stuff ever. Some real psychedelic Meigs County. The first time I ever got blueberry blew my mind.
For
Like,
sure.
I was at a Merle Saunders show, and I kicked these kids. You know, I always tried to look out for bros with free tickets. With miracles, and I saw these two young dudes standing by the door, and they didn't have tickets, and I had some friends that were supposed to come and couldn't make it at the last second, and I was like, "Here you go." And this guy came up and was like, he was like, "Hey, I saw you give those guys tickets. Why'd you do that?" And I was like, "Oh, bro, we're all deadheads, right? Here, Merle Saunders, we're all deadheads. It's what we do, kick downs." And he was like, "Word." And he gave me this joint. He's like, "You're gonna love this."
Oh
And
man,
he saw me do something kind, so he did something kind to me, which is what happens at dead shows. And
that's sweet.
it was so cool, man. And it was so the flavor was so overwhelming and so new to me, like that sort of palate I had never experienced, and that I put it out. I was like, "Oh, this is sprayed with something or something." And I went and found the guy, and I was like, like, "Tell me the truth. What is this? Like, what's it sprayed with?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "It's DJ Short's blueberry.
Mm,
It's just weed, bro. It's just weed. I swear to you." And it blew my mind.
that's awesome.
That was a big one.
All right. Well, then
Yeah, I
next
like them all.
question. I feel that sometimes it's hard to pick. Um, who
Yeah,
would be your favorite breeder? Like if you had to just grow one breeder's gear for the next few runs, who would it be?
man. That's hard too, because there's a lot of breeders that have been really good to me, and man, my buddy Jared over at Genetically Superior Seeds does some. He's a low key killer. Like that dude does some amazing crosses. Man, I gotta say, just geez, I guess I'm gonna have to go with Green Bodie because he sent me so much fire, and there's a lot of good. Like I like when people are like, "What kind of cultivars do you like? What kind of strains do you like?" I'm drawn towards stuff that has real short family trees. Stuff that people are still working, um, pretty early genetics. And so he's got some real killer, like Northern Lights #5 crosses, just platinumed out. His best shit, sour best shit ever. Um, there's just some real fire in there. So,
For sure.
man, yeah, that's a tough one. But yeah,
That's a good
I,
choice, though. I respect that decision because you have a lot of options to go with there. Like he doesn't just dabble with the old; he dabbles with the new, and
yeah,
he has a lot of that are tried and tested, and where he's shown fairly decent consistency across large seed populations, which is always really important to me. Yeah, that's a great answer. We haven't had Green Bow to be the answer for that one yet, so I like that.
I like his ethics. He and I have talked a lot, and I like that at the end of the day, I think that we're very similar in that, like, he just wants the most fire ass weed
Right?
he can possibly. Because there's a lot of growers out there like that. There's a lot of breeders out there like that. But like, those are the people that I like, are the ones that are just like, they can't wait to show you their herb,
Hmm.
and they're smoking their own herb,
Yeah,
like I you know that's always, when I walk in, somebody's like, oh, this is my last round, you gotta check this out.
for sure.
I love going and hanging at Mako Farms with Justin, not at the farm, but like, I love hanging with him because he's always got something that he's really proud of that he just pulled down,
Nice.
he's not a
That's
breeder,
awesome.
but yeah, I just,
Fair.
yeah, yeah.
Hey, a good grower though. Totally different art, but definitely the person you want to know and you want to be on good terms with because they have the fire. Um, all right,
Yeah.
last question then. What's your most memorable cannabis related experience? You talked about the one where you were 4 years old, getting blitzed between your dad and your uncle, I think you said, and just everything turning purple. But was there any other experiences where you look back and you're like, that to me is my pinnacle cannabis experience?
Um, I mean, there's been times where I was so high, there's been some really funny times where I was just so high. Um, my brother smoked me out. He had a friend this kid's dad was in a two-wheeled social club. We'll leave it at that. And his dad had passed away, and he was holding down the grow for this club. And my brother had gotten some herb from this guy, and was like, okay, pothead, check this out. And I did a gravity bong of this stuff, and I couldn't, the door was right, like I could touch the door, and I got so high that I was like freaking out. I was like, I got to get out of this room. So I like turned and I whispered to my friend, I was like, I need to get out of here. And they were like, well, go outside. I was like, I just need some fresh air.
Go touch
And
grass.
I'm whispering, and everybody in the room can hear me, but I'm whispering. And I was so high. Yeah, that was pretty funny. I've been so high off of edibles before, like that, full on tripping off of edibles. But as far as like, I feel like every time you sit down and break bread with friends, that's what I refer to getting high. It's a social thing. I think that every single time you do that, it's memorable and cool. I think that set and setting has a lot to do with cannabis. I always enjoy
Definitely.
cannabis, but I always enjoy it more with friends.
Hmm.
Um,
Isn't it weird that you can
yeah,
smoke a
I don't
joint
know.
by yourself and it doesn't really, you'll be like, oh no, this is great. I feel good. But then you like sit down with four people, the same amount of weed, and you're like, whoo, I am blitzed after this. This is great.
Yeah, I love that. It really is, like, weed does, you know, um, it helps me with a lot of things, physically, mentally, whatever. But I love the social aspect of it. Um, I just I'm eternally grateful and indebted to cannabis. It's taught me so much about, you know, like I I'm very lucky to have, played sports my whole life and on a pretty high level. And a lot of my friends can't walk, let alone get out there and get it, and I do a lot of
Yeah.
hiking and I do a lot of, pretty aggressive still. And without cannabis, there's no way I could have gotten through some of the injuries I've gotten through and that sort of thing. It's been a lifesaver for me in so many different ways, and I feel very indebted to this plant, and I feel a custodial responsibility.
For sure. No, I think that's beautiful. Because the plants helped me out a lot too, mentally, physically. It's done so much for me, and it has helped me kind of get over hurdles in life that I don't know where I would have ended. I probably would have landed on my feet either way, but I've gotten over hurdles in a more graceful way than I feel like I could have without cannabis on my side. So I can greatly appreciate what you're saying there. And also, I just want to say thank
Weed
you so
got me.
much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, man. This has been a blast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man, 2.5 hours just flew by. That was
Yeah,
it was
I'm
one of my
chatty.
longer shows. I love it.
It'll go. Oh, nice. Okay, yeah. Tad's always, laughing at me because I don't mean to. I'm just a very excitable dog, and when I get around other dogs that want to play, I get really hyped up, and I'm chatty. You know.
I totally appreciate that. I try to do my best as the host to allow the guests to talk, but sometimes I end up talking too much myself or interrupting or jumping in when I shouldn't. But I get where you're coming from.
Yeah. I'm always down to hear other people's stories. I love it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that's why I started the show. For as the name goes, that's the way we grow, is by learning from other people, hearing stories, sharing information. We all stand on the shoulders of giants in terms of this plant and cultivation in general. So sharing these stories and kind of paying homage and respect to all those who are putting the input into the community, I feel is very important. I don't do a lot of shows anymore. It's life gets crazy, but hopefully I'll keep doing one every couple months or so like this. And I hope that all the viewers have enjoyed this show so far. And thank you so much for being a part of the Craft Growers Network community. And
Thanks for
if you have any suggestions for future episodes, feel free to reach out. You can find me at Mr. Wolf Grows Wolf with an E on most different platforms, mostly Instagram and Reddit, though. But Brandon, would you like to just give your last shout outs to where people can find you?
Yeah. So obviously the seed thing is changing, but I do a decent amount of breeding, and if you're interested in what I've got, Brandon, Brandon, tat like tattoo, at yahoo.com. So Brandon Tat at yahoo.com if you're interested in seeds. You can always DM me on Instagram, Tatusadu, but it might be a while before I see it. What else? I'm at Kiss Organics. So Brandon at kissorganics.com. I do a decent amount of public speaking, but I will be at our conference in the last weekend of August in Montana. We got Bryant Mason, Suzanne Wainwright Evans, the Bug Lady. I know that they'll be there. There's a couple other folks that have already signed on as well. So really looking forward to that. And I think that's it. But if you need some help with the organic side of things, Brandon at Kiss Organics, KIS, just one S, but Brandon at kissorganics.com. And otherwise hopefully I see you at a show or out hiking.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us. We're gonna hop off here and probably just chat a little bit to wrap this up on our end, but I hope that you all enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next time.